Hey, everybody, this is your boy John, and today on the Geeks from the Multiverse podcast, we're going to be talking about zombies and the origin slash history of how zombies were created, and even talk about the media and different, I would say, TVs and films, as well as even different, video games and different, media presences. So stay tuned.
What is up, John?
What's up, Matt? So, zombies, right? It seems weird to me that when I look at them, we always think of these like weird looking like creatures, right? I mean, granted they're human, right?
Yeah.
So it's weird when you see how like let's say back then versus now of like how they were supposed to look like. So like, you look at like Daisy or not Daisy, sorry, like Last of Us or like, The Walking Dead or something like that and you're like, they're totally different from probably even from way back when.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking the 1920s. If somebody from the 1920s saw what we call a zombie today, they would completely disagree and
Right.
say that's not a zombie.
Well, no, I mean, like when you look at zombies, like when I think of like a zombie now, it's like they show a lot of like flesh coming out of their skin, like so the skin's gone. It's like they're kind of grayish, in a sense, and I mean their bones are sticking out.
Yeah.
They could have like missing limbs and in different things, and they're just like, they're like really stupid and really. And
How did that go again?
Like I don't know how to describe it, but like, when I look at zombies, they're they're raggedy, they're really gross. I mean, they're rotting for God's sakes. I
Right.
mean, it's bad enough when you look at them. I'm like, I mean, if there was a zombie coming into this room right now, I'd be like, let's double tap. Like, let's get it going. Let's go Zombieland real quick on a great movie, by the way. But I think we should talk about like the history of zombies itself. you
Yeah, I
know?
mean, I guess we have to first figure out, what is a zombie? And that's kind of the first, I guess.
Well, yeah, segue into the whole thing. So,
Yeah.
when you look at a zombie, so the definition, okay, is a mythological undead creature created through the animation of a corpse. So it doesn't necessarily need to be humans, right? Because I mean, most people would think a human would be a zombie, right? So you could have,
Yeah.
a walking like undead dog, right? So if like Bucky, was dead and then all of a sudden came back to life, I'd be like, oh, that's weird, man. Like I wouldn't want a corgi who was a zombie, like, coming after me. But like, you can have different like creatures, different things like that. So it doesn't necessarily need to be like, like you or I being a zombie. Yeah. And so, the original term for a zombie, which I kind of had an idea from the beginning, but like if it was kind of interesting that, from Haitian folklore, it was a zombie that is the dead body reanimated through various methods, most commonly magical practices in religions like voodoo. Okay, so like, if you think of voodoo, I'm thinking like, of course, like a doll, right? So like they like the weird, voodoo, I don't know, like gypsy, I don't know, like, I don't know what you want to call them, but like these, like, usually like older women, they like, put like a
Yeah.
curse on the doll and then like they,
I do think movies from the 20s and the 30s and the 40s have probably gave voodoo, even though like, yeah, I mean, I guess it could be evil in a sense, but I think movies and media, I think might have given voodoo maybe a twist that wasn't originally there.
yeah, I mean, when you look at voodoo, I'm like, like I said, like the whole doll thing and like you put a curse on it. And so like, let's say I made a doll out of you and then like I moved your arm and then all of a sudden your arm moves and like it does weird things.
You don't have a doll of me, right?
Maybe I do, man. I don't know. Maybe I'll get one just for you. Like, I don't know. Maybe I'll do some voodooism on you. But
I hope not.
you're right though. I mean, I feel like the media, like in general, so like movies, TV shows, whatever, like they made it probably not even more magic, right? It was just more like it was like a virus or some kind of like infection or something like that that made it to be like a zombie. So like a lot of like movies I think of as like like or like a TV show, for example, like The Last of Us was like a fungal infection. It was like
Right.
from a mushroom or something like that. Or, you know, I'm just gonna throw it out there, but like or like if you had the cure for cancer or something like that, and then all of a sudden they switch. They have this like
Well, and that was um probably a bunch of movies. Like I Am Legend was a cure for, I don't know if it was cancer in particular, but they were working on a cure.
no, it was actually cancer. I do remember they're like, hey, we have a cure for cancer, and all of a
Yeah.
sudden they like. Now, granted, we talked about it before that it wasn't a zombie.
Right, they were more vampires, and that's the novelization of I Am Legend. Is it specifically mentions vampires in the novel? But yeah, and that's watching a documentary. You know, I don't. It wasn't particularly on zombies, but I think it was on movie. A movie about zombies.
Right.
Um, they had mentioned a scientist who was doing a study on Haitians reanimating corpses, because this is a real thing. Like,
Oh no, yeah,
it's
absolutely.
it's
Like this is a
not.
real thing, and it actually scares me a little bit.
Yeah, Haitians really practice this, and there's an actual powder that they make that is said to reanimate the dead. And there's a guy who said that he actually died. I think it was like 70 something years ago.
Oh, and then he came back to life. through this.
And yeah, they did this ritual. They used the powder, and I don't know if he's still alive today, because I think the documentary was 2018 or something. But
Yeah, I don't think he would probably be
Um,
around, but
he in this episode, he was, I think, 80 something, and he was still alive. Whether the story's true or not, I have no idea, because it's just their story, or my whatever.
right. It's
But
he said, she said kind of a thing, but yeah.
that's incredibly scary when you actually think about, like, if they can actually reanimate
I
the
mean,
dead.
to me, like the most realistic version of like modern media is like probably The Last of Us. Like that, like when they were talking about like the fungal, kind of infection, and like, how like they were talking about like mushrooms and different particular ones that were like the spores would come out and like, would turn people into these like these
Yeah.
creatures. Like that to me is honestly probably the most scariest thing, because like we don't know. I mean, there's things out there that we don't know even till this day. That I would say probably the only other thing that I can think of that could possibly even be real on this is rabies. Rabies could, that's basically what it does. I mean, it takes over their mind and it just becomes into this like cannibalistic creature.
Yeah,
And
and that's the problem. If you didn't die so quickly from getting rabies, I guess that would be the real issue. If rabies ever mutated into something else, like, that would be a problem,
well,
because
yeah.
essentially that's what it does.
Well, and if you think about it, so like if you say you take voodooism and like take rabies and you put them together, I mean, that's probably as close as I mean, that could be a more realistic like version of how a zombie could be created nowadays, unfortunately. But
Yeah.
like, granted, we're talking about like the movie and media aspect, but like,
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I think the most probably realistic is a movie that you haven't seen, which is The Crazies.
no, I
And,
haven't
and
seen
that
it.
one was literally just a virus that drove people. I mean, like the title of the movie, it drove people crazy to a point where they lost who they were physically. They didn't really get sick, but it made them want to kill, like, everything.
Yeah, and I mean, with zombies, I mean, like the whole point of like, their mentality or like their mental capacity is like they only focus on what's in front of them. They don't have the mental capacity as like a normal human being in that sense. And
Basic impulses.
right,
Yeah.
and it's like the basic survival instincts, and so they become these like, one-minded creatures, and then when they get into a horde of say like zombies or something like that, they turn into this like massive, powerful, destructive, beings. And I think that it's like the herd mentality. Like that's exactly what they do. They just herd up together, and they're just an undestructible force to be reckoned with. And so when you look at a zombie as a one thing, when they start to, I guess, kind of adapt, right? Because I think that's basically the best way to do it. Is like, they might let's say in media, like they start out walking, but then like some of them mutate and they like start to run and they start to, get, not saying smarter, but they learn their surroundings and how to,
Yeah.
defeat, let's say, enemies or whatever the case is, right? But I mean, when it comes down to the history, you know, the one thing I will mention is like, so the first recorded use of it, okay, was back in 1819 by a poet. Actually, I don't really know the poet's name, but the thing was, it was spelled zombie in the Haitian French terminology, and the definition was it was compared to a body without a soul. So basically, a ghost that still retains its soul, or spirit that is meant to wander the earth or torment the living. So again, like, when you look at that as a whole, everything we've been already talking about, like
Yeah.
that's basically what it is. I mean, it is kind of like a ghost coming into like the possession of a body and tormenting the ones around you. But I mean, like when you look at zombies now, yeah, they are cannibalistic. They're they're acting on impulses that
Yeah,
they,
and there
they
was a
don't normally
definite. I
do.
mean, there was a definite shift um, that had occurred, and obviously, films helped with this shift. But kind of going into films from the 1920s all the way up to the 60s, most of these films like depicted zombies in this kind of like voodoo or witchcraft. It was more or less like these, dead being in control of somebody else. They weren't necessarily like, carnivorous, monstrous, like flesh eating zombies that we know.
Right. I mean, it was more like a mind control
Right. They
aspect of it.
used them more in the, if you had a loved one and you wanted them resurrected, like they would go see this witch and they would resurrect them. And then, something bad would happen where kind of like I guess a Frankenstein kind of story where
Well,
they,
yeah, yeah.
they would maybe like murder somebody on accident because they don't know what they're doing. And it's like kind of like they're really weird stories. And some of the stories are exactly like you have this witch who raises some dead to go after a village that did them wrong. So
Yeah.
that's what a lot of the movies were in from the 20s all the way up to the 60s. You didn't have these movies where, you're looking at an apocalyptic world and you have zombies that are, just biting and attacking and people are turning into zombies. Like all the stuff that we see now didn't exist then.
No, I mean, like, so you look at like the Walking Dead, right? Because that's like the post apocalyptic world where they're kind of living in the Stone Age of like modern times in that sense,
Yeah.
because they're going back to like the old ways of doing things. So like I'm not saying they don't have electricity in the show, but like it's hard to find, depending on where you're at. But like when you're talking about like the earlier versions of zombies, in like 1920s, 19 like through the 60s, you know, we were talking about this too, is like, they were basically like put on makeup, basically like kind of look, I guess decrepit, I guess if you want to put it as best way as you can, but they weren't like flesh eating, like they weren't like,
Yeah.
they weren't rotten. They weren't anything. So granted, it was like black and white for the most part up until like, maybe 50s, 60s time frame where the color kind of came into play a little bit, but it was hard to like, notice the difference until later on when they started becoming these, different creatures of what that was portrayed back then.
Yeah, so the real difference is 1968, and that's when probably one of the most popular movies came out as far as, zombies, even though this movie does, the creatures, and I'll call them creatures, are not actually called zombies in this movie. What, at any point, they're actually called ghouls, not zombies.
Yeah, I
And
mean that would make sense for that time.
um but this movie is Night of the Living Dead, which is probably one of the most popular
Yeah, I would say horror films.
horror films, depicting zombies. And the movie is done by George Romero, a famous, director. He's done a lot of zombie movies. other horror movies too, but
Yeah.
he's done a lot of zombie movies. And it was partially inspired by the novelization of I Am Legend.
Which we already talked about, and like looking at I Am Legend, like the now, film wise, I mean, it was done really well. Don't get me wrong, but you're right. But it had nothing to do with.
The novelization, which was the book was written in 1954. So
I mean, granted, the movie came out in like what was it, 20? I can't even remember. It was like 2010s or like 20 or like early 2000s or something like that. But yeah,
the novelization's completely different. If you read the book, it's different, and it brought on this. Night of the Living Dead brought on a new interpretation of what a zombie is, because nobody had seen this type of zombie in a movie before. And again, they didn't call them zombies in this movie; they called them ghouls. And every other zombie movie, they were originally created from some kind of a supernatural force, not because of like radiation or a virus or a biological force. They were all created using some kind of like voodoo or witchcraft or
right. Some magical kind of force behind it.
So this was really, really different. And it kind of revolutionized future movies and future projects for zombies in particular. Interesting note on this movie is that this movie is actually public domain.
Oh, interesting. I would have thought it would have never been because of how popular it was.
And this movie became public domain the day it came out.
So you're telling me, because it's not copyrighted, if we wanted to, I'm not saying we would, but if we wanted to, we could use the music and use other things because it is public domain.
You can use literally the entire thing. And the reason why this movie is public domain is because when they released it, they did not put a copyright notice on the movie.
So my question is, maybe we should do an episode of when copyright started to exist, because now I'm curious of when it actually happened.
So they failed to put a copyright notice when they released the movie. So the very second it was released and seen by the public, the movie was public domain, because they couldn't go back and put a copyright notice on it because it was already made public.
So I'm wondering if could they have ever gone back and done that?
No.
Or is it because once they release it, it's done?
Yeah, once it was released, it was done. So the music, the characters, the story, every part of this movie is public domain.
I mean, to me, that just seems crazy. Like, you would think that they have everything made. They're like, okay, this is going to be a great movie, blah, blah, blah. And now all of a sudden they can't copyright it. They can't do anything. And now literally anyone's like, you know what? Okay, you know what? I'll use their story. They can make millions literally off of this one movie because of the idea they created.
Absolutely crazy to think that from day one, this movie was public domain.
Idiots is all I got to say. That was your one job, Charlie. That's your one job.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's just crazy to me that, like, I mean, it's such a classic movie, and the wife and I always joke all the time, because like one of the most iconic scenes was it's in the beginning, and it's Barbara, who's one of the main characters in the movie. Her and her brother are walking in the cemetery, and her brother kind of sees this, I guess, older guy kind of walking towards her, and he's like, "Look, there's one of them now. They're coming to get you, Barbara." And it's just like a stupid scene, but it's like it's such an iconic like scene. And she's like, "Knock it off," and he's like, "They're coming to get you, Barbara." And he's like just teasing the crap out of her. And the thing is an actual zombie.
I mean, my question is that how they did "Here's Johnny"? Like, I don't know. Probably not. But
Probably not.
I found it interesting though that this guy, because I didn't really know who George Romero was. Like, because I'm, of course, I'm like kind of looking at this a little bit, but Michael Jackson, okay, with like Thriller and things of that nature, because I know that was technically made into a film back in the day, back in the 80s. But it was interesting that he made that video for him, which makes sense, and especially in this regard. Yeah. But like, I did not know that. I did not know that he made it. He was the director of that film.
Yeah, and he made that one, and he also made a couple more movies. So Night of the Living Dead is kind of a part one, which, you know, Dawn of the Dead and Return of the Living Dead were kind of part two and part three of those.
I mean, it's crazy
Stories?
though, because I mean, Dawn of the Dead came out in 78 and the Return of the Living Dead came out in 85. So I mean, this guy had 10 years in between the first and second film, and then had like, you know, what, like 7 between the third film or whatever. But
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what he worked on in between. I'm assuming he must have worked on other projects in between, but
no, I mean, but that, I mean, still, that's a 10-year gap, which I found it. I mean, I don't know if you. I'm assuming you've seen both of them, like the other, like the sequels to these.
Dawn of the Dead's a classic. Return of the Living Dead is also a classic. I mean, it's more of a cult classic, but I would almost classify it as horror comedy,
Okay,
because
okay.
it is one of those kind of crazy kind of zombie movies. It's hard to take it serious.
So, would this be the first time like comedic, you know, zombie kind of movies came out? Like, do you think that's like the first time they really did that with that?
It's definitely very crazy.
No, no,
I
because
think you would have to see it in order to judge it, but it definitely uses more comedy than Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead did, because Dawn of the Dead was more of a serious, like,
yeah, kind of like like adaptation of
yeah.
it. But I'm thinking more like, you know, with the Return of the Living Dead, it was kind of like, you know, I'm thinking more of like, I know we're going to talk about this later, but like Shaun of the Dead, right? Like, is it like you think like because of the Return of the Living Dead, kind of like inspired Shaun of the Dead a little bit because it was that spoof kind of comedic, you know, kind of
I'm
movie
sure.
to
Oh,
it?
I'm sure it did. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure because of the way that it was done, and the comedy's intentional. Like when you watch the movie, like you know that what they're doing in this movie is intentional. Like it's not that they just did like a B movie.
Oh yeah, no, no, yeah, yeah, no, I understand. Right, I understand that piece. I was just more curious because you know a lot of the newer you know zombie movies could be you know based upon you know kind of the works from Romero, like him pushing it out. You
Oh, I
know,
mean, he definitely, with Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead. I mean, there's even a remake to Dawn of the Dead, which is a newer version. Um, his movie, you know, his original zombie movies changed the whole landscape of what we know. Like without his movies changing that landscape, we wouldn't have shows like Walking Dead.
or The Last of Us or anything like that.
We wouldn't have Resident Evil. We wouldn't have Dead Island. We wouldn't have like any of these things.
Yeah, so I mean, basically, he was the pioneer.
We would
You know,
still be
for this.
looking at voodoo zombies.
No, I mean,
You know?
no, I mean, yeah, that's true. That's true.
So you know, we go kind of from Michael Jackson's Thriller, which was 85. You know, Return of the Living Dead was 85. Um, and there's really nothing until mid 90s.
Which is crazy because I would have thought they would have capitalized even back in the 80s too a little bit more. Besides going into the 90s and kind of doing more with that.
I really think, you know, the whole zombie thing cycles. You know,
So,
I think
so it's like popular one time and then it like
Yeah,
goes away and then comes back.
I think I think it really does cycle because, I mean, even in the 90s, there weren't a whole lot of, there's not a whole lot of content in the 90s. I mean, you have games like Resident Evil. House of the Dead was a huge arcade hit
that was I remember
with
playing that.
with the gun, you know.
Yeah, so like, yeah, you go to the arcades and you'll be I always think of like Space Center back in the day where you could like go into like the House of the
Yeah.
Dead or like Resident Evil. They might have like those little arcade games, and like you know you and your buddy, you're like, okay, let's go, and you're like you know watching every turn and you're doing all that. But like I agree, like that was a like a staple like back in the 90s to you know to be able to do that. I mean they did bring it into like the early 2000s a little bit as well, but you know I agree
Yeah.
that those kinds of games kind of probably transpired because of you know those works from Romero.
And Resident Evil actually had, I think, one of the first times that we actually saw dogs.
Oh, dog zombies?
Yeah, I think that was one of the first times that we actually saw dogs, because in the game they actually do chase you, and it, you know, when you're Resident Evil, you know, for the time that it came out, was actually a very scary game.
No, I agree. I mean, even I would say even, and I'm going to mention only one game that actually a lot of people, if you play it on virtual reality, is Biohazard. It was one of the first times they did that, and I saw people's reactions to that. Oh my God! Like it was, like I was watching them play it, and they had the headset on and did all that, and I was just watching them play it. I couldn't even watch it for like 5 minutes.
You know me, I'm all set.
Again, but no, I'm just saying, like, but that was scary enough to like,
Yeah.
no, I'm not, I can only imagine when it came
But
out.
I do remember playing the original, Resident Evil 2, and playing Resident Evil, walking around I believe it was the mansion in the first
Yep.
one. You're walking around some of these like hallways, and the windows are all boarded up, and you're not expecting anything. But it was just like, because it's more environmental horror,
Yeah.
and it's the lighting, it's the music.
Well, the music usually, like, that's when people, like, something's coming and you don't know what it is yet.
But this game was weird because like the music didn't hint you until you started walking down a hallway, and then the music would hit at the same time that zombie arms would come flying in the windows, and you have no idea what's going on, and it scares the crap out of you.
Yeah, it was like a split-second thing.
Yeah, you have no idea, and it's like, oh my gosh, that like my heart's fluttering.
Like, I don't know what to do right now. I mean, I feel like a lot of like the games in general were, I don't even know, like a lot of the games, like even now, like they really do a good job, and especially unfortunately with the graphics, like it's becoming more and more scarier. Like the more like they come out with like new Resident Evils and stuff like that. I mean, it gets to another level, and that's why I said with virtual reality. I mean, imagine if virtual reality came back like early like 90s or like when Resident Evil came out. And I'm not saying like the graphics and everything, but I guarantee you most people would be like, no, I'm not playing it because I'm not going to go into, like a basically like a heart attack or, getting like, epilepsy and just like, falling on the ground and start seizuring and stuff. I'm like, no, I can't even imagine that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, like a lot of these, movies and games really have transpired, from, some of the earlier stuff, but like, I know, like we're going to talk about probably movies right now, but like,
I mean, the like we said before, like the '90s didn't have like a lot of content. Resident Evil and House of the Dead, like some games here and there, but once we hit the 2000s,
oh, it started getting crazy.
Zombies just came back with like such a fire. Like everything was zombies, like movies, TV shows, video games. I mean, 2000s is where we really, that's where it started really exploring the idea of a post-apocalyptic world where zombies weren't the only thing that you had to now worry about. It's now like finding food, finding shelter, protecting yourself from not just zombies, but the people around you.
Right, because like, in some of them, it even like, I know like in some video games, a lot of them were becoming more cannibalistic. Like they become cannibals because they didn't have enough food or whatever. But like, it was like almost like they were turning into a zombie themselves without even noticing that. And it was like, it was getting more weird and the more, more TV shows, more movies and that kind of content.
And it's not, I think a lot of the content before seemed like it was more like isolated events. Like Night of Living Dead was an isolated event. You watch the whole movie from start to finish, whatever the scenario was, like zombies happened at the end of the at the end of the movie, they're sending patrols out, like they're killing the rest of the zombies. Like it seems like it's over, but they're kind of isolated events. Like you don't know what the rest of the world is looking like until you get to like maybe Dawn of the Dead, where he kind of explores that world a little bit more. And you get to Return of the Living Dead, where they kind of explore the idea of they have these kind of toxic waste barrels from the military.
Oh, of course, blame the military. Here we go.
Well, it kind of like what had happened was it seeped into the ground in a cemetery. Like it got out, and
Yeah, like biological, like radiation and stuff like that, that, uranium or whatever. Yeah.
Right. And that's kind of how like it got, but they were isolated incidents. What the 2000s really explored was that this wasn't like an isolated incident. Now this was like
Like a worldwide
permanent.
phenomenon.
This
Yeah.
was forever. Like,
Well, yeah, I mean, like when we were talking about like I Am Legend with the whole like cure for cancer, or like let's say The Last of Us, where it was like a fungal infection, and then it would like the spores would come out and it would like infect people. So like those are the kinds of like things that it's like a worldwide phenomenon, and it just like spread like
yeah,
wildfire. And like you said, like it was that permanent, like you can't get back from this kind of moment.
right. Instead of being an isolated event, everything is permanent. Like it permanently affects the world around you, and it totally shifts what was happening before, because you look at the 20s now through the 60s, those were probably all isolated events.
Right, that started to spread slowly, throughout different areas. But yeah,
And then you look at, Night of the Living Dead, you look at some of those, again, maybe, isolated events on a slightly bigger scale. And now you look at the 2000s and you look at shows like Walking Dead, Z Nation, Last of Us, like World War Z. Like,
so my question to you then is this, okay? So I know we talked about Skynet and whatnot. So I'm going to go a little off track here, but
here we go.
so if you would, there's really it's a two-part question. So first off, if if Skynet was a thing, and let's say this whole zombie apocalyptic world comes into play, which one would you rather have? Would you rather have Skynet, or would you rather have a post-apocalyptic world?
Well, I mean, I'd rather have a post-apocalyptic world than fighting robots that are trying to kill me.
Well, no, I understand that, but like, what I guess my other question would be, which one do you think is more, even like we'll say right now in today's standards, which one do you think would actually happen more than the other?
Oh, by far, zombies would probably happen more than Skynet.
No, I mean I agree, but like I mean, if we keep doing the whole AI thing, if we keep advancing it, you know what I mean? Like, could that become more of a reality than zombies?
I think zombies is probably, I mean, zombies as we know them, I don't think would occur. Like I said, I think it would be more like, the movie The Crazies. I think it would look more like that.
Okay.
But if I were to say, AI taking over and Skynet being a thing, I don't know if we would get like Terminators and robots like actually going after us. I think it would just be AI taking over infrastructures.
Oh yeah, no, I mean I can see that happening for
Like,
sure.
Nuclear war, taking over banks, taking over, you know,
Right. So our currency, or like our world economy, would go basically to crap and everything else, and so basically it would almost turn into a post-apocalyptic world, as it would be in a sense.
it would turn into something similar to the Purge until there was a nuclear.
Right, bomb, and then it, of course, kill all of mankind. So basically, to me, like now this is just me. Yes, of course, I'd rather have zombies in this case, because then you know what I do. I'm going to say it, like I would leave here, and I would go. I'd go find. I would just get out of here, and just go find a compound and start building it up. And I'd bring certain people with me. I'd bring basically everyone who knew how to shoot a gun. Okay. I'd basically bring like certain people like
I think
medical
guns
and
would
things
only
like
get you
that.
so far, though.
No, I understand that, but like I would bring certain individuals, like so I would have, again, I'd have, of course, my wife who's a paramedic, right? So I'd have somebody who's at least medicinal, right? So like at least I know, like if we could treat her, great. If we can't, then we got to either amputate or do something, because depending on what kind you can do, but like have certain key personnel, have like people who, yeah, I'd even go pick up a farmer. I'd start picking people out. I'm like, hey, what do you do? Okay, come on, let's go. Come on. I just start building up my own colony. I just start grabbing people.
So basically, I almost have no purpose.
No, I mean, you could come with me. It's fine if you want to. You want to bring you and Danielle and whatnot. So if you want to come with me, that's fine. But what I'm saying is, I'd start building a colony. Now the thing is, though, is like with AI, reality is, yeah. I mean, when we look at how advanced, unfortunately, it's going to become, in some ways. you're right. I don't think it would turn into like a Terminator, like robots flying around trying to kill us and, trying to, basically kill all of humanity. But like, you look at like in either situation, like realistically, it would be a post-apocalyptic world, and you would have to find a way to like survive and do all that. And so, when we look at how, our society is now, like you think of all the doomsday preppers, man, those guys are the smartest people. And I'll tell you why. Because they know that if this whole thing ever happened, either zombies or whatever, they're ready to go. Like they have bunkers, they have all kind. I mean, they are smart. So don't ever think that they're stupid, because I'm gonna tell you, you might think they're crazy, but guess what? They're ready, and they're ready for any situation. So keep that in mind. So if you have doomsday prepper friends, then guess what? You better become their best friends pretty soon. That's all I'm gonna say.
Yeah.
But anyways, but like when you look at the zombie like media like moving forward, right? So like with like a lot of the movies, I always think of like, I mean, this is more kind of spoof, of course, but like, I always think of like Shaun of the Dead, Zombieland, the funny comedic.
We got to go to the Winchester.
The Winchester.
Yeah.
Was that in Zombieland?
No, that was in Shaun of the Dead.
Was it? Oh my god, man, I haven't seen that in a while. I'm sorry. You know what? I'm sorry, man. I have to rewatch it.
John.
Don't even go there. But anyways,
That was the whole point of the movie. They're trying to get to the Winchester.
Man, it's been so long since I've seen it. I have seen it, but it's been a while. But like, when I think of like Zombieland, I always think of like Double Tap. It's like you don't want to just shoot them once; you want to shoot them twice, and you better make sure they're shooting them right in the head.
I think whenever, I mean, it is thanks to that movie, because I mean, whenever I think, when I see a movie or a TV show where, there's a good guy, taking care of an enemy, that's what I always think of. Like, make sure you double tap, because they never do. And the enemy comes back and I go, you needed to double tap.
Well,
because he wouldn't have come back if he did.
I'm not gonna lie. I feel like in some ways that I don't know if it really did, but I feel like that movie kind of coined the whole double tap thing. It really did, because like honestly, if you look at games and stuff, I mean, or even like movies, like ever since then, it was just like, yeah, they double tapped. Like
in video games, I do it all the time.
Well, no, but that's the thing. That should be like basically a rule of thumb in that case, because if you're not doing that and you think, oh, they're fine, no, they're going to come right back at you.
Oh, I see it. I mean, you watch a movie and like, like they're taking care of business, but then like you're like, you just did that one time. Like, no, you need to go back. No, go
turn around and shoot him again. Like it's not that hard. Just go around, shoot him in the head twice,
and almost without fail. What happens?
Oh yeah,
they get right back up and they
come right after you.
Go after him again, and it's like you needed to double tap, and they wouldn't have done that.
All I'm gonna say is if you watch The Walking Dead, there's a reason why they do a lot of those things, and unfortunately, a lot of people, good people, unfortunately, do meet the fatal end from a zombie. But
yeah,
I mean, you're right though. I mean, double tap is like the most important thing in like in that aspect. If you're versing a horde of zombies, yeah, you better get up like a saw machine gun or something and just start going it down.
So one of the ones that I really liked, I mean, there's a couple of them that I really like. 28 Days Later, when that movie came out, I don't know if it was one of the very first ones, but it was one of the very first movies that I remember that the zombies in the movie were actual like fast moving, like they ran full bore after you.
Yeah, and it was kind of like, I always think of also like I Am Legend and like how they were like really like coming after you, and it wasn't like a slow pace. I mean, they were full on charging you. And
yeah, I mean, it does remind me of like the runners in Dead Island, where they kind of do that scream and they are literally chasing after you and they don't stop.
No, and it's crazy. Like when I said about like zombies earlier, like how the original interpretation was like these slow moving.
Yeah, they're kind of like
guys
lurking and slow moving, and like you can kind of like Walking Dead. They show them and like you can just kind of like move around them, like Dead Rising, which is one of the video game series. It's similar to Dead Island, but in that game, which was kind of really different, you could actually move around without getting relatively damaged. Like the zombies were really slow moving, like they didn't really like Dead Island, they really attack you. So it's really difficult and they keep chasing you. But Dead Rising, like it was really easy to go from like one side to the other to, in one of the games, like you were kind of in this like shopping mall and, you can go throughout the whole, basically throughout the whole mall with almost not getting hit at all because they move that slow.
I mean, when you look at Dead Island, I mean, it was one of those games that it was interesting because you can pick your player, and it didn't matter who it was. I do remember that one guy. It was the rapper. I mean, granted,
Sam B.
yeah, he was like, "Who do you voodoo?" And then he said another word, but yeah, basically, it was like it was kind of funny looking, but it was just like all these different people that you could play as. It was interesting how that was kind of the first time where I remember in certain games, like, because they only had like one main player. Like in this game, it was more like, hey, you can pick different people with different perks or different attributes and stuff. And
Yeah.
so it made it more interesting because you didn't have to play as one player. You can play as different people. And yeah, it was an interesting time because it made it more of a personal experience, and it made it more different in a different aspect because the more progression that you were doing, I mean, like different people had different like charismatic features or whatever, so you can talk to certain individuals and you can be like, I want this, and like, okay, well, you need to do this, and then you can kind of like manipulate the situation in some ways, but like in some games, like I look at like Dying Light. I know you never really played it, but like that they say that Dying Light was the first time for video games that it was more, it was like the precursor for a lot of the zombie games, which I don't believe that because it's not the case. Because you look at Resident Evil, you look at Dead Rising, you look at all these other games that came before it.
Yeah, I mean, I would say Resident Evil definitely was the precursor to zombie games if you were going to call any game a precursor.
I mean, I will say this. I mean, Dying Light became more of a parkour parkour game, and so it it made it easier for people to like jump around and do certain things. It was kind of cool how they did it, but it was never the they were saying, a lot of people like, oh yeah, this is like the game for zombies, and I'm like, no man, like there's so many other games that you could play, and there's so many other like games that do different modes, like one of your favorite, Matt's. What was it? Is it Call of? Oh yeah, Call of Duty. Because the first time they came out with zombies, which I don't know if you remember this, was World at War.
See, I didn't play zombies right out of the gate because I wasn't. I mean, I'm kind of still not a huge fan of the Call of Duty zombies because I've always wanted. As far as Call of Duty, like I love the play style of Call of Duty. Like there's no other play style that's like Call of Duty, and I'll say that right out of the gate.
No, absolutely.
But when you play zombies, for a lot of the Call of Duty games that offer zombies, because not everyone did, but when you play zombies, I mean it's basically like survival, and no matter if you played online with others or you tried it yourself, if you tried it yourself, you're not doing any objectives or trying to accomplish anything because you're just trying to survive. But if you found people to play with, they're also not doing it. So you end up getting to like maybe round 15 if you make it that far. If you make it to round 20 or 30, you're with a pretty good crew.
No, yeah. I mean, and the thing is about zombies, it was like, that was the first time when they introduced it. It was more about waves and like kind of like getting into the, the map, and you're like trying to unlock different rooms and like go explore
like the little Easter eggs and like the little, unlockables or whatever, whatever like the little story was. But for a lot of people, they didn't actually do that. It was just about surviving and getting the XP.
Yeah, and I mean, Call of Duty, like you're right. I mean, they enhanced the zombie mode, in their way of doing it, and it is a different play style of playing zombies. But like if you're playing, different games like Dead Island or Dying Light or any of those, I mean, a lot of them were more based on like you're building weapons, you're trying to survive, basically zombies, but as a horde. Sometimes it was like individuals, and then sometimes you might have a lot of them coming after you.
Yeah.
And so you had to basically strategize with a buddy or somebody like that, and be able to like understand your surroundings and like which zombies are, more. Um, I don't know if I wouldn't say prone, but basically like you had to know their weaknesses. You had to know like what was going to be the most effective, in that
Yeah.
situation.
See, and one of the ones that I loved, which was on the Xbox, which I can't play now because I have a PS4.
I wonder why.
But one of the series that I loved, was the Left 4 Dead series, and Left 4 Dead and Left 4 Dead 2. And that one was, your first person shooter. Each game had 4 different characters that you could pick, and it was very much like when you're playing it, it was very much like you were playing a movie. So you were characters in a movie, and each story was a movie.
Well, I know that, Left 4 Dead also made Back for Blood, which was also on both PlayStation and the Xbox, which we both played. I mean, it's
Not
the
quite
same.
the same,
You're
but
right. I mean, Left 4 Dead was kind of that nostalgic, kind of
yeah.
gameplay and whatever. But like, unfortunately now, unless they remastered it, but again, it's only going to be for Xbox. It's never going to go to the PlayStation at this point.
No,
but
it's not, and that's kind of the, it's really awful that they don't. But I guess you could play it on Steam.
you could play it on Steam, or you could play it on probably other like gaming services that
Yeah.
provide it. But I mean, you look at, some of the, the other, games as well. I mean, one of the games that I always liked too was actually I played a little bit of it, but it was Days Gone. I don't know if you've ever.
I played a little bit. I mean, whatever I played with you, actually.
Yeah, it was a very I mean, highly realistic. I mean, and it was definitely it's kind of like The Walking Dead. That's what it reminded me of, and it was very realistic because, for example, if you're driving like a motorcycle, because this guy is part of a motorcycle gang, and you had to get gas, like you had to find gas. You had to. It was just like in most zombie games, you had to find ammo, food, shelter, like all these different things, and like it was interesting because like this was one of the first times I've actually seen it where like in the gameplay, one of the first times it was like, you'd actually have a horde of zombies, like not like hundreds of them just coming right after you. And I've seen people like having to defeat them all at once. And I'm like, how? These guys were running away. They're doing other stupid things. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. But like, you're right. In a lot of the like, other games like Left 4 Dead, you might have like, players that go with you and do all that. Like some of these other games that, we have on this list is like, you're doing it by yourself. There is no like partner, like Dead Island was a perfect example. Like it's a great co-op, game that you could play. Dying Light, but I know for a fact, if I'm not mistaken, was only a one player game. I don't think it had co-op, but like
The second one, I think you could do co-op,
but that's what I mean. Like
Yeah.
Dead Island at least was a co-op experience that you could play because a lot of them didn't have that. You'd only had the single player. Like you couldn't play with your buddy. You couldn't do all that, and it wasn't like a team, basically a death match or anything like that you could do together. But like, that's why COD, kind of brought a new, interesting way of doing that. But it was like for me, like I agree with you. We've talked about this is, if they did like a zombie campaign, mode or something like that, where you'd have a co-op, partner or something like that, and be able to like play and like do a story and like, see how it actually transpires. But like Call of Duty isn't going to do that. I mean, they just built it.
Well, it's interesting. We're going to actually talk about that in the next episode because we're going to talk about a couple upcoming video games.
You're right. Yes.
We're going to talk more about that because they are doing something different with zombies for Modern Warfare 3.
Yes, but I'm just saying, like presently, like right now, they don't do that.
Presently, they have not done it, and they should have because their zombie modes have lacked.
Oh yeah,
lot. Yeah,
absolutely.
So I mean, we have kind of talked about some different types of zombies already. With kind of these newer games and these newer shows, they have shown different types of zombies than the normal, fast moving or slow moving, which are more of the, I guess, mutated types of zombies.
Yeah,
So
because right, the original ones are like walkers. They're just kind of normal.
yeah, normal kind of human looking or animals or whatever. So some of the ones like you would see them in Dead Island. Left 4 Dead had a version. I'm sure some of these games have had these versions.
Like Last of Us was another big one that I could see.
Dead Island, they're called slobbers. Left 4 Dead, I think they're called pukers.
Yeah, probably right because they do. Oh, that's right because they'd puke on you. And,
Um,
yeah, they'd
so
throw acid.
they're kind of like these huge, fat, kind of overgrown. Um, they usually, I think Left 4 Dead, they kind of, vomited this like bile that was like, it had actually attracted zombie hordes.
Yeah, and I do remember that in Back for Blood because basically you'd sit there and then if these guys were
It would
doing it,
cover your screen and you can't see, and then you just hear
zombies come out of
zombies
nowhere.
Yeah.
And it was ridiculous because then it was just like you'd have like not only one, you'd have like let's say 50 all of a sudden just appear on
Yeah.
the screen and you're like, what?
Probably one of the funniest ones though, was in Left 4 Dead, and it's called a smoker.
I I only think about this like guy who has like a COPD problem, like it's like
And
like that.
well, that's what's funny because like when you knew it was around, all you would hear is like this kind of like smoker's cough.
Like like that. Like
Yeah,
right?
you would hear the smoker's cough, and then all of a sudden, like a tongue would dart out and it would grab you and pull you to wherever this thing usually would stand like on a rooftop. So it would like literally hold you.
Wait, so how long was his tongue?
It was, it was pretty long. It would grab, it would grab you and pull you.
Never mind. I'm just saying about tongues here, but like, that to me seems really gross. Or it reminds me of like Toad from like, X-Men, like he just comes
But
out.
that's typically what he would do is like the tongue would hold you, and then the zombies that were around would just attack you. Or if there was another like special infected that was around that area, there was one that was called the Hunter. He had like more of the sharp claws and would crawl around. When he jumped on you, would just kind of scratch you to death.
But that doesn't seem, I don't know. That just, to me, that just seems kind of stupid. I mean, that's okay. Like I'm going to come scratch you.
But you couldn't get him off of you. That's the problem.
Mm.
So we've, with these newer kind of, I guess the 2010s and the 2020s, seen like a lot more of these like kind of special mutated, infected, which are not the normal types.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, with zombies now, I mean, like I'm thinking more like, like I always think of like even like The Last of Us did a really good job on some of the newer kind of like different variations of zombies. So like I remember the clicker, right? Or the ones that go, I can't even really do it, but it was like, it was like this weird clicking noise, and like it was so creepy. And especially like when they showed it on the TV show and then like playing it in the game, it was so it like basically gives me like chills, and like it just makes me want to be like, if I saw this thing, I would like grab a knife, or I'd like basically grab a shotgun.
Is it almost like my Predator noise, John?
Yeah, you know what, guys? If you want to listen, go to the Predator episode, and you'll hear what I'm talking about. Like it was creepy, man. Like it was not something I wanted to be around. But like, you look at Last of Us, you look at like Call of Duty. I mean, Call of Duty was more like they were like grunting, and they were like, oh, they were like yelling at you and going. And then you look at like Dead Island, where some of these zombies were different, and like we were talking about like the shamblers and the walkers, the runners, like the normal kind of zombies, but they had like different ways of like, I don't know, like talk. I'm not saying talking, but like making these noises and
Right.
stuff.
Yeah. So most of the games, like obviously the zombies all have different noises that they make to identify. Like once you hear him, you're like, oh boy, where is he?
Yeah, and I mean, and it was. I'll tell you this: if you ever play Last of Us at night, and especially if like nothing is going on in the house, and you're just sitting there and you're playing the game, and all of a sudden it's like, bam! It's like this music comes on, and it literally jumps me out of my seat.
One of the, Left 4 Dead, like one of the things that like was probably the like, I don't know if it was like the scariest, but it was kind of like, if you got it right, it was like one of the coolest like celebration moments. but if you got it wrong, it was like it did kind of the same thing like you're with the music and the way that the game handled it was very like scary, because in the game there was a character called the witch, and it was basically a woman. I'm assuming a zombie type woman, but all you would hear is this woman crying. And as you got closer, you would hear like, it'd just be like, like, and you would hear
Yeah.
this crying, and like this kind of light music would just kind of play.
So like an eerie kind of like music.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
You have no idea where she is. As you get closer, you can kind of hear that kind of moaning, crying turn into like her kind of just.
That was more of a cackle, but yeah.
As you get closer, so you're like, okay, I should back off a little bit. And then as you back off, that turns more into like the crying. So you're like, okay, I must be getting really close. And as you do get closer to her, like that music gets louder and louder, where, you eventually like figure out like, if I go right up to her, crouch down, obviously, because if I walk up to her, that's when that music hits and she chases you down. It's like one of the most scariest things, because you can turn and tail it right out of there, but she's chasing you and she kills you. Like it's
So you're saying that
without a doubt, she kills you.
If the witch was a real thing, you would not want to go against this thing.
If I heard that in real life, I would not be like, I wonder if that girl's okay. No, I'd be, screw that, I'm out.
Wait a minute, hold on. So you're saying like in most like horror films, so like you'd be that guy like how, and I'll say this, I'm just gonna say it as more of a generic thing, but and I'll say this right. So like the white people, okay, we're both white, okay, or Caucasian, right? So we for some reason always think that it's the greatest idea to go explore the options of what is in front of us.
Like-
and then no offense, like everyone else, and I'll say like African Americans, like whatever, right? So they are like, no, we need to get out of here. And like, we're just like, yeah, let's go explore.
You hear that girl crying? I think
so,
we should go check it out.
So Matt would be like, nah, I'm joining you, man.
I'm out. I'm out.
Like, honestly, I'd probably join you too, because I wouldn't want to deal with that.
But that's the thing. Like as soon as she's aware that you're there and she stands up, like she scratches and kills you almost immediately. And you kind of had to like figure it out. Like if I have a shotgun, which is one of the only ways that you can really get her, you kind of crouch down and you kind of ease right up to her. You aim the shotgun right at her head, and then boom, 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 like rapid fire.
No, man, like
and she's down and she's good. But if you screw that up, you might as well just,
dude, I
restart that
honestly
game.
I would just like stand far away, and I would just find like an RPG and just blow up that whole entire room that she was in.
See, there's no RPGs.
Well, I'm just saying in real life, like if that was a thing, I would find an RPG or something, or I would get an explosive and be like, we're done. Throw a grenade, like we're out of here.
But it made for like one of like kind of an iconic moment when you heard that crying. Do you go investigate? Do I have a shotgun? No, I have an assault rifle. All right, screw that. I'm not doing that. Because the minute you try to go near, you start hearing that like that screeching, and like, okay, she's starting to like become aware and wake up. I'm not like, most of the time I was just like, I'm gonna keep moving. Like she's not even worth it.
Nope, I'm just
Not
gonna
even
move
worth
on.
it. So, a couple of other things, like we have various names for the zombies that we've seen in various, movies, TV shows, video games. I'm gonna read the Walking Dead ones in rapid fire. I don't think we have to linger on a lot of these.
No, of course not.
I'm gonna try to like read these, even though some of these are kind of funny. But these ones are all from Walking Dead. There's more, but I got most of them, I think. So we got walkers, roamers, lurkers, chompers, rotters, biters, freaks, hissers,
Deadheads.
Deadhead.
That's funny.
Munchers, Rippers, Sickos, Stinkers, the Damned, the Infected.
So deadheads, munchers, man. Like what did you think of when you thought of that? Or like the stinkers and the sickos? Like, hey, you sicko, come here. Like, I don't know.
I mean, I can see stinkers, rotters. I can see that, biters,
Well, when you think of biters and munchers, I mean, you might as well put them in the same category. I mean, that's just me if I'm looking at them. And then freaks, like, okay, come here, freak. Like, I don't know, like, why would you pick these names? That's my first question. But
the next couple of them, like, this movie's really weird to me because Warm Bodies was one of those movies where it was a love story.
Okay,
and
I think I've seen this. Yeah,
and the guy's dead.
And it's a girl that it loves a zombie.
Well, he's in love with her, so he's obviously a zombie and is trying to still
having a romantic relationship with her,
trying to have a romantic relationship, even though he's a zombie and he knows he's dead. But it's such a weird.
I mean, I think I know what you're talking about, but like so I'll read this. So like the basically it's the fleshies versus the bonies. So
that sounds awkward.
It very much sounds awkward because again, zombies with flesh and then bonies without flesh, right? So it's like
very basic. Like that would be like if a 5-year-old you were trying to explain zombies.
Bonies and fleshies.
Yeah. See, those are the fleshies,
and those are
the bonies. Yeah.
Like, I mean, again, we could go on and on about that, but it just
We'll move on. So the next couple of them, like. Ghouls were, kind of what they were calling them in a few different types of movies. Night of the Living Dead was, I think, kind of the start of them being called ghouls.
Yeah.
But there's various like different other movies and TV shows and stuff that called them ghouls. But we have Living Dead, G's, which are, I guess, I probably would be short for ghouls.
Yeah. What's up, G?
Yeah. Look at those G's over there.
Look at them.
Hungries. Zombs, which is, one of the movies, they call them Zombs because it was just shorter.
Yeah, shorter, yeah. And then, we mentioned the whole Dead Island, like certain ones like Shamblers, Runners, Walkers, like, those kinds of things as well. But I mean, those are just different, of course, names that, you could use, I guess, if you wanted to, like,
yeah, and I mean, the each one kind of describes a different type. So the Shamblers were ones that were very rotten. Their bones were exposed. The flesh was very rotten. Obviously, the runners were
running at you.
It's in the name, yeah. Walkers were just kind of your run-of-the-mill zombie. The special ones, though, your crushers were your kind of big muscle-bound zombies. The bursters were
the exploding ones.
Yeah, they were kind of mutated. They looked kind of gross, but they would try to run at you and explode. Screamers. Their scream would literally push you back and would call other zombies to kind of hoard you, which was kind of a problem in the game.
Well, yeah, no kidding on that one.
Slobbers, which are kind of the same as like the pukers, and they would kind of like in the game. There's a chemical called caustic X, I believe it's called, and it's kind of like this acid.
Yeah, and I mean, like the other two, like the Butcher and the Mutator. I mean, the Butcher, like I know you and I were talking about it before, but like basically the ones that had like blades for arms and running at you and trying to basically cut your head off in this case. But
yeah, the Butchers in the game are very like nimble, so they're very quick and agile and very, very tough. So they try to like stab you and slice you, and then the Mutator is a very, very tall. I mean, their arm is almost completely like a club. Yeah, they're very like very, very tough.
So like, so it's like really Dead Island and then it's Riptide and then goes into Dead Island 2. A lot of the newer special ones we just talked about were in Dead Island 2. So if you ever do get a chance to play it, it's actually a pretty good game. I mean, I'm a little slacking right now when it comes to the game, but I know Matt and I we're trying to do that co-op thing that we've been trying to do, but he's like, "Oh, I'm level 27 now," and I'm like,
I have a character
2.
waiting at level like 4.
Oh, great! So you can
waiting
catch up
right
with
at
me?
that point of co-op.
Yeah, so that
where your character's waiting.
Yes, that's
so our two characters are waiting
to play.
on separate systems to play together.
Yeah, it's fine. No, I got you. I got you. Yeah, that's fine. Because you were like, yeah, I feel bad. I'll just wait until
My other characters, though, all the way at the
close to the end, isn't it?
pretty close to the end. I mean, I'm level 24. I'm getting there. I'm
Yeah.
getting there, John. I'm
No,
getting
so
there.
basically, I'm slacking. It's fine. I got you. But the one thing we want to kind of wrap up with is kind of our experiences with all the different games that you and I have played, right? So like Dead Island, we've been kind of like mentioning a lot of, and like
Yeah,
Call of Duty.
Riptide was fun. Like I that was one of the games I think like having to like, go to the workbench and make weapons and
Well, you do that in the first one. I mean, it wasn't just in Riptide.
yeah, I
but
mean, I think Riptide though. I mean, Riptide was different than the first game, and I think that one was more interesting than the first game was.
yeah. I mean, it was like we both played, first Dead Island and then the Riptide. And I mean, it's funny. Matt and I have talked about for years how Dead Island 2, originally it came out, it was supposed to come out in 2016. Okay. It came out now in 2023 and it's waited this long
Yeah,
because there was both him and I were like, yeah, we saw the actual preview of the game a long time ago when we were both, working at a facility together. And we were like, yeah, we're going to wait. We're going to like, yeah, let's play it. Let's play it. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh, we canceled the game. And we're like, what? Like, this is ridiculous. And we found out that the studio was like disbanded and basically they didn't actually do anything with it. And they basically canceled the project. And then all of a sudden a new studio came and grabbed it and picked it up and like they revamped the entire thing. Because like in the original video, it was not even close to what it is now. And I mean, it looked good in the original gameplay that it showed, but I would say I don't know if like when I looked at Dead Island 2 and when it originally was showing it, I feel like it kind of did a better job of like graphics in some ways. But like I think in the 2023 now, like it's done a good job. I mean, unfortunately, I feel like some of the the motions that you like hit zombies and stuff like that has been like a little slower in some of like in
there
some
are. I
aspects.
mean, there are definitely some things where when your character's holding a revolver, it looks kind of weird. I mean, I understand like the two hand thing, but yeah, I mean, it's definitely when you're using like a lot of the melee weapons, there are certainly like inconsistencies. I guess I would call it, but for the most part, though, I think like with what happens when you hit them, with certain weapons is like kind of a cool effect. Like when when you're using like blades and you end up cutting like the arm off, like it's not just like a clean cut. Like you can actually see like
the bones and flesh and like
Yeah.
the blood coming out. And no, and I agree because like when playing it on the PlayStation 5, it's got a little bit more kind of gory effect, which is kind of nice. And like some of the the other games like original Dead Island and Riptide, I'm not saying it wouldn't show that, but like this one kind of gives you more of the exploding effect of like what it would actually look like if that was the case. And I mean, when you and I played like zombies together, a while back, I mean, even now, like some of it's okay, like some of the waves and like, you get to explore different, areas and then there's like Easter eggs and like having to, do it as a team to like, get the, the actual objective done and like completing it. But of course, then Matt and I would play together and then we'd have like two, I'd say idiots, because I'm going to call them that because these guys wouldn't do anything. They would basically go do off and basically kill the zombies. And then we're like, we're not ready yet. And then we'd go into like a certain portion of the map when we're trying to do something. They're like, no, we're going to deny you and we're not going to play it. And I'm like, you guys don't understand how to play zombies because this is getting ridiculous. And it's making it really frustrating because then what we do is we try to kick them out. So that way him and I were only playing. So that way we could do, the match together and then we would, escape and do our thing. But,
and that was the tricky part about, the zombie mode in Vanguard, because there were actual things to do
right.
In Vanguard, and to find actual people that actually wanted to do those particular like things, it was almost physically impossible. There is actually an end boss. Like, I don't know if most people know this, but there is an actual end boss that you can get to.
Well, I mean, it was more once the other zombie mats came out. That's when you could see that end boss, though. It wasn't like in the very first map that you played originally that they had that end boss come. Like you saw him, or you got to see him like on the screen a little
Well,
bit.
no,
but,
you
like,
had to do like those little objectives
right to get to that end goal.
to get to that point. And I've gotten to that point 2 times with 2 different groups of people.
Of course, not with me, but yeah.
But I've only gotten there twice, and we died both times like at that very end boss. But it was extremely, extremely difficult. Like to do all of those like little objectives and to get all the like the little things, and it's like to find a group of people that actually want to do it.
It's pretty rare.
Because if you end up waiting until you're on round, wave 12 or wave 15, you're
done.
you're already beyond the point of where you should be.
Right, because I mean, most people, I think it was like around, was it 10 or 12 when they would usually escape? It was like right when because a lot of them would be like, I want to go, I want to leave.
Oh yeah, they go in and they leave almost right away. It's like, yep, they're gone.
Because one of the objectives was you have to do, I think it was like 1,000 zombie matches, and like you have to escape or something.
It's just
like
about exfilling, yeah.
And it was just like one of those things. But like, I will say this, like with zombies, a lot of different games have done really good jobs. Like The Last of Us has done an amazing storyline. I think it needs to stop being remastered for the 3rd time in a row because it started on the PS3, went to the PS4, and now is on the PS5. So it needs to stop. Like I think it just needs to be like, okay, cool. We get the whole story. That's great. I don't need to play it 3 different times on 3 different consoles. Me personally, because I've already played the story like multiple times now. But you look at Last of Us, you look at Last of Us 2 or Part 2, and then hopefully the 3rd one, which I'm hoping at some point, because I really would love to, see if they're going to actually do it, which my guess it probably comes out on the PS5 or possibly PS6. I don't know, depending on how they're going to do it. But, like Last of Us, zombies in, Call of Duty or even like Dead Island and stuff like that. And, even Dying Light, if you want to, play that game too, they've done a good job on, the video game aspect, but like movies wise, I'm not saying there isn't like the best film of all time when it comes to zombies. I think every movie that we've seen or like that I've seen or like just in general, I mean, they have their own different variations of how they come up with it and everything else. But I mean, zombies as a whole, mythological kind of like creature, it's an interesting topic. And I think it definitely doesn't always get what it deserves, and like credit wise. I mean, because it is a unique, kind of, creature and, and how it came up to be, I mean, it started out with like Haitian roots and then, all of a sudden became what it is.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different interpretations. And I want to say the newer Creep Show TV show, it's on Shudder, had a, kind of, Creep Show has these short, episodes.
Right.
Where they did one on zombies.
Right.
And it wasn't a virus. It wasn't, biological. It wasn't actually voodoo. It was demonic possession.
And see, that's interesting. That was a different concept.
It was very interesting to think of, demonic possession as an infection.
Right.
And infecting the world population. Like we kind of think of like, oh, we see these like, the Pope's Exorcist, and we see these movies, with demonic possession possessing like one person. This episode was demonic possession on a apocalyptic scale. So demons were jumping from one person to another, like possessing everybody in the world.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting how, you look at zombies as a whole, I mean, and how they've interpreted, even the term and how they, were created in like their universe or their world. And, I just, like I said, zombies it is an interesting topic, and it's very, and I'm hoping that maybe at some point they'll even create something even more bizarre and more, out there, because like, we've talked about like the whole voodoo, we've talked about like infections, viruses, fungal spores, all this other
Yeah.
stuff, but like I'm wondering how they're going to create more stuff later on in, the media side of the house.
Although I do think they might need to just stop making different Walking Deads, but that's just my personal
No, I
opinion.
agree. I think they need to stop. I
Yeah.
think they've they've juiced it so far. They don't need to go any further than that.
I mean,
But
maybe like a Walking Dead CSI,
oh yeah, yeah, zombies, like come out of nowhere and you're like, hey, let's find out like what happened to this guy. All of a sudden you're like, well, what happened to this guy? Well, he died because he walked into a stake in the ground or something like that. And you're like, okay, let's find out how he got killed and whatever. I don't know, something stupid. But maybe it's AI who does it. Maybe Skynet will happen. Anyways,
let's put a wrap on this.
so, Matt, we talk about all this stuff. It's great and all. We love how you guys have, hopefully been listening to us, and supporting us. So again, we appreciate everything you guys do, and we're really looking forward to giving you more content, giving you more stuff, and when it comes down to, supporting us, again, follow us, like us, whatever, reach out to us. We're always here to listen. We're always here to hear new ideas and whatnot. And, until next time, stay
Stay geeky.